And so we start the last chapter of our family history. After about 14 years in the Air Force, I took off my flying suit, donned civilian clothes, and started working at Manulife as a computer programmer. At this point, the family tree, at least our piece of it, is pretty simple. There's my mother and father at the top, Loris and myself in the middle, and the two youngsters, Brian and Valerie, as she was then called, at the bottom. All our belongings had come to Toronto in a U-Haul trailer pulled behind my 57 Chevy, and we found an apartment on Avenue Road, just south of the 401. After our spacious North Bay married quarters, a city apartment was a little bit cramped. I used to take Brian up to the 401, and we used to lean over the bridge and watch the traffic go by. Great entertainment. I started my programming career on the IBM 1401. It was the second generation of business computers. It had an amazing 16,000 bytes of memory. And we programmed in an assembler language that was, well, a long way from the high-level languages of today. That's what it looks like. We left the apartment as soon as we could and moved into 130 Roywood Drive in Don Mills. Here the kids learned the joys of Saturday morning big city television. Penelope Pit Stop was quite good fun, but really Scooby-Doo and, of course, Rocky and Bullwinkle with Dudley Do-Right were the flavor of the moment. In 1971, we took our first vacation at Ryan Lake, and over the years, as the kids got older, well, we all kind of grew up there. Ryan Lake was a few miles northeast of Parry Sound. Had a series of really nice cottages, and the adventures over the years saw us, for instance, spend midnight in the graveyard, exploring the old house that was full of bats. I was a bit nervous about that one. Then there was Whale Island, the old truck, and of course the spiders. The spiders there were huge and fierce. We went for long walks on country lanes. Valerie made about 14,000 sandcastles, and basically we just went native. Sunsets at Ryan Lake were and are a memory to hang on to. In 1973, after about 43 years, I re-met my father. Here he is with his new family. Stepmother is there on the left, and the couple smooching are my, let's see, I guess that would be stepsister and stepbrother-in-law. That same year, 1973, my mother retired from her managership of the Van Heusen shirt factory in Watchet. Here she is with a group of the employees, and sitting on her right is Aunt Molly. In 1975, my grandmother died. That same year, while at a computer conference in California, I took my first trip into the desert, and I was hooked. From there on, almost every year saw me back hiking, either in Arizona or Utah. In 1979, Brian graduated from George S. Henry High School.
When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think.
And would go on to study computer science at the University of Waterloo. In 1981, Loris and I separated. And I moved into an apartment on Stevenson Avenue, just off the Danforth in Toronto. In 1982, I took a vacation in the UK, and I re-met Margaret Hellman, whom I briefly dated when I was stationed at St. Neville almost 30 years ago. But the base had long been abandoned. Here's the entrance to the officers' mess, and all that's left of the officers' mess itself. Margaret and I seemed to hit it off. So in 1983, I transferred to Manulife's UK office in Stevenage and decided to try and settle down to being an Englishman again. I'd only been back in England a short time when on March the 10th, 1983, my mother died. That same year, Brian graduated from the University of Waterloo, made a European trip and came to see me at the apartment I was staying in Broome Hall, which was just up the road from Stevenage. Margaret and I got married in June of that year, and we found a cozy council house, or ex-council house, at 189 Verity Way in Stevenage. In 1984, Jill graduated from high school. Yeah, I said Jill. She'd gotten into horses in a big way and decided that Valerie just wasn't a horsey type name, so she became Gillian from there on. By 1985, I'd become disenchanted with work at Manulife and decided to go home. Margaret's son Michael was at a critical stage in his education, so she decided to stay on in England. She became assistant headmistress at St. Margaret's School for Girls in Bushy, and I came home to Manulife and Stevenson Avenue apartment. The next year I bought 170 Gowan Avenue, a tidy little house in East York. My father died in 1987. And the next year, in 1988, Margaret became a Canadian. Well, she came to Canada anyway. Her dad died in 1989. At work, computers kept getting bigger and bigger. And at play, I kept hitting the desert every year or so, and the years went by. In 1993, Aunt Molly's Ron died.
Before we see if your investments are on track, why don't you tell me about your retirement plans?
In 1998, I retired. Manulife gave us lots of briefings on how to manage our money and what to do with the reduced income, but luckily none of them was as radical as this one.
Every waking moment together. It's going to be great, isn't it, Nancy?
Yes, dear. You should.
Within a month of my retiring, Brian got married. The lady was Carmel Smith. Carmel worked for the CBC. Margaret and I moved to Campbellford, a small town in eastern Ontario, and bought This house, 110 Front Street North. Yes, it's on the river, but we didn't buy a boat. We just rented one as the occasion demanded. In 2001, Loris became a victim of cancer, and then 4 years later, Margaret's mother, Rona, died in her 90s. And in 2009, we lost Margaret's son, Michael. At the close of our story, Brian is working at Manulife as a computer specialist, and Jill is an office manager at a job placement agency. Before we write 30, a final look at the family tree, both the living and the dead. All are gone, the old familiar faces, and yet, hopefully with this movie, they'll stay with us forever. Unless somehow the missing uncle's progeny show up, this Eley line is ended. But at least the Larter line, thanks to Susan and Dick, is set to flourish for a long time to come. So, as the sun sinks slowly in the west, adios.